Hello, I'm Blaze and welcome back to Warframe. This has been a fairly long time coming, so I'm sorry for the delay, but perhaps that's fitting considering the actual rework was a long time coming as well. But without further ado, it's time to look at Excalibur's shiny new blade work. Acquiring Excalibur can be done at the very start of the game, where currently you can choose between Mag, Volt and Excalibur. Personally, I feel that being locked into one choice sight unseen is a really big problem, as others have pointed out before me, but that itself is a discussion for another time. If you didn't choose him as your starter frame though, you can instead farm his parts from Ambulus on Pluto and buy the blueprint from the market for 35,000 credits. Or, as a final option, you can instead get him immediately pre-built, along with his own Warframe slot and a pre-installed reactor, for 75 platinum. In most cases, I would advise against buying Warframes with platinum, but Excalibur is one of the cheaper ones, and a lot of the cost offsets itself with how he comes with the slot and reactor bundled in. So if you don't already have him, but you're anxious to do so, it's not a terrible idea. Excalibur is basically Warframe's poster boy, so seeing him heavily revamped is refreshing and gives hope to other upcoming reworks. Especially considering Excalibur's namesake and how melee combat, while not amazingly complex or deep, is also a big part of how Warframe works. Originally it was just kind of an incidental inclusion for Excalibur, but his updated abilities and his new ultimate focus the essence of the Tenno's mastery of the blade into something you can really get a feel for, and cut down everything that stands in opposition to you. Excalibur's base stats are largely the template on which other Warframes are based, with 100 base shields, health, power capacity, and stamina, and a sprint speed modifier at the baseline of 1.0. He also has the distinction of being one of only two Warframes that don't start with a polarity in his aura slot, the other being Necros. On the one hand, this lets you use any aura mod without penalties, but on the other hand, it also means that you don't get the double capacity increase bonus for adding a matching polarity either. In terms of normal mod polarities, he comes along with a D polarity and a V polarity by default, which is handy as it lets you get a discount on one of your defensive mods and one of the various power stat mods like Intensify or Continuity. However, departing from the baseline, the rework has also given him a reasonably high armor rating of 225, letting him mitigate incoming health damage and letting Steel Fiber do its job that much better. Which with his new melee focus is a very good thing, as in the past he was too fragile to make effective use of melee combat. A final change, which I don't believe is currently stated within the game itself, is that Excalibur has a unique passive bonus for some melee weapons. All sword class weapons gain a 10% attack speed and damage bonus while he uses them. Specifically, these weapons are the sword, dual sword and Nikana classes. Actually listing every single weapon in those classes would take all day, but it does include the iconic Skana and Dragon Nikana. But while vitals are all well and good, as I said on my Chroma video, the powers are what makes the Warframe. So with that in mind, it's time to take Excalibur out and see just what the Lady of the Lake in Digital Extremes has seen fit to bestow on us. All statistics I quote from here on will be when the ability is at its maximum rank. Slash Dash is Excalibur's first ability and works in one of two ways. If any enemies are in a 12-meter cone centered on your point of aim, Excalibur will draw a path between those enemies and lunge from one to the next in sequence, delivering an attack with his energy blade on each target, dealing 250 base damage, knocking them down, and adding to the melee combo counter. He will even leap up to attack flying enemies that have been targeted and will become immune to health damage while dashing, ensuring that no enemies escape his wrath. I will say, however, that the targeting can be a little iffy. It seems to be based on line of sight at the time you first cast the ability. Enemies that you target and run behind cover after you activate Slash Dash will usually still be hit, but enemies that start behind cover or are obstructed from Excalibur's point of view by other enemies in front may not be hit. This may be worth keeping in mind if you are thinking on using Slash Dash against a densely packed enemy formation. However, a truly noteworthy thing about Slash Dash now is that its base damage scales not only with power strength mods, but also equipped melee mods. All base damage mods and elemental mods will also apply to Slash Dash, allowing it to scale up to a great extent. However, it will not carry over channeling mods, largely because Slash Dash cannot be channeled. On the other hand, if there are no enemies within the target cone, Excalibur will instead dash forward in the direction of your aim and may be angled up or down while in midair. This lets Slash Dash also become a primary mobility tool for Excalibur, letting him more quickly cover large distances or reach high platforms at the cost of energy. Personally, while I feel it is a very nice mobility tool, I feel it can't quite replace Super Jump. Super Jump didn't really get enough credit, and being able to go straight up is pretty handy. Sadly, Slash cannot really travel straight up and is in fact locked down to an angle which I will estimate at about 55 degrees from horizontal if you're trying to go up. This can make reaching high platforms a bitch because you can end up being too close and instead sliding Excalibur along the underside of the thing you were trying to get on top of. Strangely, you can go at a very steep angle while aiming down. This is probably so you can slash dash down to targets below you, but why you can't go mostly vertical when you're trying to go up, I have no idea. Maybe they were afraid of Excalibur stepping on Zephyr's talons. The length of the targeting cone is affected by power range, and is also affected by the surging dash augment, which will allow slash dash to further add to the combo counter with each enemy hit. Radial Blind is Excalibur's second ability, and remains largely as we all remember it, but can now be used on the move, so you don't have to hold still while throwing it out. Excalibur holds his blade high and emits a flash of light, blinding all enemies within 25 meters of Excalibur that he has line of sight on, or that are aware of him. This awareness is kind of like line of sight, but it will still work on enemies that only just got into cover a few moments ago as well. Blinded enemies will be temporarily staggered immediately after the flash, and will remain blinded for 15 seconds in total. Blinded enemies are able to have finisher attacks performed on them that will bypass their armor and deal high damage, and the first melee strike will also count as a stealth damage attack. Very handy if you're facing a particularly tough enemy that you want to get rid of. Do note, however, that while Radial Blind is extremely useful, it's not Soundquake. Enemies can attempt to attack you based on your last known location and audible gunshots, and there is a reuse delay of 5 seconds, though this reuse delay is shortened by natural talent. Radial Blind is affected by power range and power duration mods, and you can also equip the Radiant Finish Augment mod to boost the finisher damage dealt to enemies affected by Radial Blind by up to 300%, which leads to some pretty damn big numbers, and the finisher damage boost itself is affected by power strength. Radial Javelin used to be Excalibur's fourth ability, but has now been moved down to his third ability and now only costs 75 energy as a result. This is primarily an area kill ability. Up to 12 enemies within 25 meters of Excalibur will be targeted by the ability, and be dealt 1000 damage each when Excalibur slams his sword into the ground as the javelins are launched into their targets. This is split between impact, slash and puncture, meaning that the damage will fall off quite hard at high levels. But it will be extremely useful early on and in mid-game areas to deal with large groups of enemies at once. The targeting of Radial Javelin is similar to Radial Blind. It will still hit as long as you either have line of sight, or you had line of sight a few seconds ago before you used the ability. Along with damage, Radial Javelin does come along with a short stagger for enemies hit by it. Personally, I don't feel like the stagger adds much in the way of crowd control, but you may find it useful in situations where enemies don't quite meet the criteria to be hit with Radial Blind yet, or if for whatever reason you're running a minimum duration build. Radial Javelin is affected by power strength and power range mods, and can also be augmented with a Furious Javelin mod. Furious Javelin causes each enemy hit by Radial Javelin to give Excalibur a boost to his melee damage by 5% for each enemy for 12 seconds. The augment itself is also affected by power duration and power strength mods, and I will say it has some promise if you can manage to fit it into your build, which I suppose really is where the problem lies. Exalted Blade is Excalibur's new fourth and final ability. Get comfortable because there's a lot to say about this one. Pausing for a moment, he extends a blade of rippling energy from his hand with which to cleave his foes in twain with its own unique stance. Exalted Blade is a channeled ability with a 25 initial energy cost and a drain of 2.5 energy per second. The Exalted Blade starts with a base damage of 250 with a range of 2 meters, a status chance of 10% and a critical chance of 15% with a 2 times damage multiplier. Every standard attack sends out a shockwave of energy in the direction of your aim a la Legend of Zelda. This shockwave moves slowly, but has the same 250 base damage and a 10% status chance, and act like Fluctus projectiles in that they have infinite punch through, basically ignoring terrain entirely. But it has a maximum range of 40 meters that does not seem to be affected by mods. On top of that, Exalted Blade itself also benefits from Excalibur's 10% attack speed and damage bonus with swords. Exalted Blade, like Slash Dash, is affected by equipped melee mods, but this time it takes pretty much everything into account, only seeming to ignore thrown weapon mods. Base damage and elemental mods will stack onto Exalted Blade's damage, critical mods and status mods will apply those stats for Exalted Blade, and channeling mods will also be carried over, letting you add in Life Strike to restore health at a moment's notice. You can add on Fury to increase the attack rate, and Exalted Blade will also proc Berserker if it lands a critical hit. Incredibly, it even carries over Syndicate mods, complete with the charging radial effect, allowing Exalted Blade to make use of Justice, Truth, Entropy, Blight and Purity effects if you equip them on the applicable weapons. The only reason you don't get to use Sequence is because the parent sequence hasn't seen fit to develop a melee weapon mod yet. Personally, I really like using the Dark Dagger with Gleaming Blight. It's a dagger, so it sadly doesn't benefit from Excalibur's sword proficiency, but I consider the Dark Dagger to be surprisingly good, and Blight's energy restore is extremely useful. But wait, there's more! Slide attacks are transformed into a miniature Radial Blind, allowing you to hit enemies with the blind effect for free at the cost of having a much shorter duration and range. But both of those are still affected by the relevant mods. While active, Exalted Blade also augments the slash dash power, causing each slash to also send out a shockwave in addition to the normal effect of slash dash. And we're still not done. Exalted Blade also grants a souped up version of auto parry, allowing all attacks from the front to be automatically deflected. This will drain stamina but will not stop if you run out of stamina or if you're doing some other action like activating life support, making Excalibur almost invincible to that which he's facing. Almost. He will still be damaged by explosions, so don't take too many bombard missiles to the face, and he only parries frontal attacks. If you do not maintain awareness of your surroundings and fail to manage your position in relation to your enemies, you will die. Exalted Blade is a phenomenal ability, and it's basically the shining star of Excalibur's arsenal. This alone has made Excalibur my current favourite Warframe now, and the moveset for Exalted Blade, while not terribly necessary, is extremely cool. Also, one last little touch that was pointed out to me some time ago, no big deal. The sword beam damages nullifier bubbles! It does come with the downside of the slide attacks having limited travel due to the Radial Blind integration, but other than that, Exalted Blade brings a hell of a lot to the table, oozing character and style, while also being extremely powerful thanks to how it's able to scale up with mods. And when running a high efficiency build, you can almost permanently stay with Exalted Blade active. In terms of mods, personally I feel like the only real option is power efficiency and strength, with some range thrown in to let Radial Blind and Slash Dash affect a greater area. Even with my build reducing duration to 68%, that is still plenty long enough to get about 10 seconds out of Radial Blind. That said, if you can fit in the mods you need, running an extended duration build instead will let you make the most out of the Furious Javelin augment if you would like to try it out. The boost to melee damage is quite decent, but as I have said, the problem is really finding somewhere to put it, as it's unfortunately one of those augment mods that require the entire build designed around it. Excalibur starts out with no aura polarity, which is nice for flexibility but also leaves you with less mod capacity, so I suggest putting a dash polarity in there. The dash polarity has the three most useful auras in Loot Detector, Energy Siphon and Corrosive Projection. You could also make a case for adding a V polarity instead for Steel Charge, but the only Warframe I run that mod with is Valkyr. In addition to adding an aura polarity, I choose to add an extra V polarity as I tend to run some of the more expensive V polarity mods. But you can also add a dash polarity if you would rather cut down the cost on Constitution or Primed Flow. Speaking of Primed Flow, I personally elect not to use it, as I find that having a high efficiency, coupled with the Blight Syndicate effect and the Rage mod's energy restore, is usually sufficient. But I do have an alternative build that makes use of Primed Flow by swapping out Blind Rage and Fleeting Expertise for Intensify and Transient Fortitude. It's not quite as powerful, but it does give a slightly longer duration. I think Excalibur quite solidly landed himself as my new favourite frame, at least for the time being. Aside from having some of the best looking cosmetic options in the game, I personally really like the Mordred helmet and it works well with the phenomenal Protoskin. I also rather have an interest in swords and other old weapons. I know I rant about how some things don't make sense in games, and I have in the past, but Excalibur has enough of an air of style and exaggeration to Exalted Blade that it kinda wraps back around into being cool again. It helps that he is named after the sword in Arthurian legend, and the name of his alternate helmets also come from Arthurian legend. It drives home the idea that Excalibur, like other Warframes, exist in defiance of the number of physical limits and conventions due to how they came about from the Void. A place described in the lore by the Orkan as a hell space where science and reason fail. The 10 are living legends, with the Warframes being their suits of armour. Though whether the Tenno can really be called the good guys has been hotly debated, When placed next to the Corpus, Grineer, and Infested, we probably look like knights in shining armor to the various civilians and resistance groups. If you aren't careless with how you position him, he can lay waste to your enemies with ruthless efficiency, well into endgame. And he comes along with a decent amount of crowd control on top of that to help supplement the group. His rework is damn impressive, and I feel the Digital Extremes did a fine job of bringing Excalibur back into full poster boy status. Thank you for watching my look at Excalibur's rework. All comments are appreciated, and I hope to see you around next time. For other Warframe reviews, feel free to click down below to check out my look at Chroma, or my review of the Prisma Gricada. And as always, good luck, have fun, and take care.